Hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar, Professional Development Webinar Series. Thank you again for joining us for a presentation titled, What Are You Craving in 2013? 5 Ways to Restore Sanity and Serenity to Your Relationship with Food with Mary DeTurris Poust. Perfectly timed as our New Year's resolutions are starting to wane and Lent is just right around the corner. My name is Jared Dees. I'm the Digital Publishing Specialist at Ave Maria Press and I'll be moderating today's webinar. This webinar is brought to you exclusively by Ave Maria Press in partnership with the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priest Councils. Everyone in our audience is muted today, but you are able to ask questions, and questions may be sent to our presenter using the GoToWebinar panel. The questions section should be right below, you can see it here, pictured right below your audio settings. Please take a moment now to find the box for typing questions in your GoToWebinar panel and simply click the send button at the bottom right-hand corner to send your questions or comments during our presentation, and I'll read as many of those questions as possible at the end of the presentation today. I'd also like to note that this webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to you later this week via email, so please watch your inboxes. Now that we've gone again through all the technical information, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to our presenter, Mary DeTurris Poust. Mary is the author and columnist and journalist, speaker, and blogger who's written for dozens of Catholic and secular publications. She's the author of Walking Together, Everyday Divine, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Catholic Catechism, that's a great title, and Parenting a Grieving Child. Poust was a senior correspondent and contributing editor for our Sunday Visitor newspaper for 14 years, and her award-winning monthly column, Lifelines, has been published in Catholic New York since 2001. Poust also writes about family, faith, and her spiritual journey at her own blog, Not Strictly Spiritual. She's worked for the Diocese of Metuchen, New Jersey, and Austin, Texas, as well as the Archdiocese of New York, where she serves as managing editor of the Catholic New York. She lives in upstate New York with her husband and 3 children. Mary, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, I'm going to hand things over to you.
Okay.
There we go. Okay, take it away.
Okay, do you see what I have up? Okay.
Yep.
First, I want to thank Ave Maria Press for inviting me to do this webinar, and I want to thank all of you for taking the time to be here today. I really appreciate it. I'd like to start the webinar with a short reflection, a meditation from the first chapter of Cravings. So often we look in the mirror as if through a glass darkly, seeing not what God has created, but what we have created in our own minds, our own hearts. We pray today for the grace and the wisdom to look beyond the surface, to see into our own souls and recognize the hand of God at work there. We are wonderfully made, known and loved by our Creator before we ever drew breath. So we are at the front end of the new year and on the cusp of Lent, as Jared mentioned. 2 times of year that typically inspire people to make resolutions, set goals, or at least reflect on where they've been and where they'd like to go. I don't tend to make resolutions, mostly because I know how easy it is not to meet my own expectations and quit in frustration. I remember one year I was at my local YMCA in early January, and every last piece of exercise equipment was taken. And I looked at the manager and asked, how long will it be like this? And he said, give it a few weeks, end of February at the latest, and most of these people will be gone. Quite a statement on our desire to improve ourselves, but our inability to stick with whatever plan we've chosen. And although I don't make resolutions, I do tend to be perpetually in a state of self-improvement, whether it's in my prayer life, my diet, my exercise, the time I spend with my kids, you name it, and I'm attempting to improve it. And that can get exhausting, especially when we feel like we're starting over or setting the same goal for the umpteenth time. But maybe it's not the particular self-improvement method we're using or the specific goal we've chosen that's the problem. Whatever our hopes and goals, maybe our potential for success has more to do with our interior life than anything we see in the mirror or weigh on a scale or measure by a bank statement or a dress size or our friend list on Facebook. Maybe our success depends on something bigger and deeper, God, and our relationship with God and our understanding of our place in God's plan. My book, Cravings, and by extension this webinar, are really part of or the start of a journey, depending on where you are. Over the next hour or so, we're going to take those first steps on a path toward wholeness, to a place where balance, peace, and self-acceptance replace fleeting resolutions, passing diet fads, and continual self-doubt or discontent. It sounds like a lot to cover in one webinar, I know. But remember, this is just the beginning. You have the rest of your life to continue the work we begin. And I think it's good if we can look more deeply at our relationship with food and where it intersects with and is bound up in our relationship with God and our view of ourselves. Probably the most common resolution or goal or hope that people make has to do with physical appearance. We want to drop 10 pounds or add more muscle, run farther, eat less, become some image of perfection we hold in our hearts and minds. But oftentimes, dropping weight and transforming ourselves has less to do with the food we eat and more to do with the messages in our head and the empty spaces in our heart just waiting to be filled. We think we're hungry for food, but often our hunger is for something much deeper, a craving for the kind of fullness that only God can provide. We end up using food to fill the voids in our lives, but that never really satisfies us. And so begins the endless cycle of weight problems, eating issues, and untapped spiritual potential. Believe it or not, the shift in your relationship with food, cravings, and diet starts not with what's in your pantry or on your plate, but what's inside your head. How do you see yourself? The first step in restoring sanity and serenity to our relationship with food really is about seeing yourself as beloved by God exactly as you are at this very moment. What do you see when you look in the mirror? I think most of us don't see our true selves when we look in the mirror. We see our flaws, magnified and out of proportion. I can look at photos from when I was much younger, a time when I thought I was overweight, and now realize I was actually average or maybe even verging on thin. But back then, I wasn't seeing myself as I truly was. I was seeing an image that paled in comparison to what I wanted to be. So our self-image is often not based on reality. We allow a number on a scale to determine our self-worth. We may not need to lose any weight at all, and yet we imagine we'd be happier or better or more successful if we could just take off 5 pounds or 20 or 50 pounds, whatever it might be for you. So it's just a reminder that you don't have to be overweight for food to be an issue for you. And maybe food isn't your issue at all. Maybe it's alcohol or shopping or gambling or spending too much time on the internet. Whatever it is that you use to fill the void in your life, it's often tangled up in what you see when you look in the mirror. We end up starving ourselves or stuffing ourselves in an attempt to become this imaginary person or to comfort ourselves for not being that person. So this process begins by embracing what is, not what we think should be. Right now I would like to read a psalm for you that became critical to me in the years leading up to Cravings and really throughout the writing process. I'll ask you to close your eyes for a minute and listen to the beautiful words of Psalm 139 and try to imagine it as something written just for you or maybe even by you. Really let the words sink in. Lord, you have probed me. You know me. You know when I sit and stand. You understand my thoughts from afar. My travels and my rest you mark. With all my ways you are familiar. Even before a word is on my tongue, Lord, you know it all. Behind and before you encircle me and rest your hand upon me. Such knowledge is beyond me, far too lofty for me to reach. Where can I hide from your spirit? From your presence, where can I flee? If I ascend to the heavens, you are there. If I go down to the depths, you are there too. If I fly with the wings of dawn and a light beyond the sea, even there your hand will guide me, your right hand hold me fast. If I say, surely darkness shall hide me, and night shall be my light. Darkness is not dark for you, and night shines as day. Darkness and light are but one. You formed my inmost being. You knit me in my mother's womb. I praise you, so wonderfully you made me. Wonderful are your works. My very self you knew. My bones were not hidden from you. When I was being made in secret, fashioned as in the depths of the earth. Your eyes foresaw my actions. In your book, all are written down. My days were shaped before one came to be. Did you hear that one verse? I think you probably know the one I mean. At least it's the one that used to jump out at me when I would read this psalm. You formed me. You formed my inmost being. You knit me in my mother's womb. I praise you. So wonderfully you made me. Wonderful are your works. When I first started praying that psalm and using it when I was working on a retreat team, I could feel walls of resistance going up. I didn't think I was so wonderfully made. I think a lot of people feel this way. We think we would be wonderfully made if we were thinner, richer, smarter, whatever it might be. When we truly hear this psalm as written for us or by us, we begin to nurture self-acceptance and self-love. We begin to see how truly loved we are by God just as we are at this moment. Little by little, as we come to own this psalm, we begin to break the ties that bind us. Food, if that is one of your ties, is no longer the enemy, but something we can enjoy as part of a happy and healthy life because we are good enough exactly as we are at this very minute. That doesn't mean that you don't want to improve sometimes. Maybe you'd still like to lose a few pounds. Maybe you need to lose a few pounds for health reasons. But you begin from a place of knowing that you're wonderfully made before you start. You begin with self-acceptance and the knowledge of God's unconditional love. The rest is gravy, so to speak. So you can set goals or make resolutions or hope for something different down the road, but it can't be tied to a less than view of yourself. In my book, I spoke with a woman named Barbara who battled eating issues her whole life, losing 100 pounds only to gain them back very quickly. Her repeated diet attempts continued to fail over and over until she began a three-prong approach to diet and food struggles, focusing not only on her physical issues, but on the emotional and spiritual issues in her life as well. Similarly, Mercy, another woman who struggled with food issues since age 10 and is also featured in Cravings, said her diet only worked when prayer, meditation, and what she calls the rigor of mindfulness were part of the equation. So after we begin to deal with self-acceptance, mindfulness has to come next or alongside it, which brings us to our second step in this effort to bring serenity to our food relationship, trading multitasking for mindfulness. What does it mean to be mindful? So often I think we associate that word with Eastern traditions, but it's just as much a part of our own Catholic spirituality. I like to think of it as the old saying, God is in the details. It means becoming aware of everything we're doing and where God might be at work in our lives, unseen but powerfully present, even in the mundane moments of our days. In our culture today, multitasking is looked upon as a badge of honor. We don't feel we're working hard enough if we're not doing at least 3 things at once. I know it makes me feel important or at least necessary when I've got more than I can handle. Look at me. I've got so many calls and emails and appointments and deadlines. I must be successful. And so I answer emails while I eat lunch or snack as I make dinner and help the kids with homework. But becoming more mindful, which is absolutely necessary on this path we're on, has to become the new approach to life. So here's how we can start. When you eat, just eat. Do one thing at a time. So when you're going to eat breakfast or lunch or dinner or even a snack, stop everything else. No driving, no talking on the phone, no working at your desk, no crossword puzzles. When you strip away all the external distractions, it's just you and your food. Suddenly you're very much aware of everything you're eating or that you're eating at all. I know when I'm multitasking, I can finish a sandwich and not even realize what I ate or what it tasted like. And that leaves us unsatisfied and looking for more. And part of that is becoming aware. I first realized how fractured and fragmented my own eating habits had become after I'd gone on my first silent retreat. On this particular retreat, there was no talking, no reading, and no writing. And for someone like me, they might as well have said no breathing. So sitting in the silent dining room with a stranger opposite me at the table, I found myself in the unlikely position of having nothing to say, nothing to look at to fill the uncomfortable silent void, and nowhere to go but inside. I stared into my bowl and focused on every bite of food. The first day back home from that retreat, I sent my kids off to school and immediately began my usual routine, oatmeal with a side of multitasking. There next to my bowl was the phone, the laptop, the New York Times crossword puzzle, unopened mail, and who knows what else. And I realized that even when I have the opportunity for a quiet meal, I find ways to fill up the space and silence. So that morning I did an about face. I put everything away. I cleared the table, put the phone away, put out a placemat and a cloth napkin, lit a candle, and began to pray. And this became my new routine and transformed a meal into meditation. Slowly, over the days and the weeks ahead, it morphed into one of the most powerful prayer times of my day. And I would really miss it on the weekend when my kids and everybody would be buzzing around, and I couldn't have even those few minutes of mindful oatmeal, as I call it. So a big part of this is beginning every meal with prayer. You know, when you start even with a spontaneous blessing, a traditional prayer, intentions for family and friends, even just the sign of the cross, it sets the tone for your meal. Taking even just a minute to stop and quiet your heart and mind before eating sort of shifts the landscape and tends to make us much more aware of our blessings and our food and our spiritual journey. It doesn't mean that every meal is going to feel like a meditation or that your kitchen is going to feel like a monastery. Our dinner table often feels more like the center ring of a three-ring circus than a silent retreat. But prayer still brings an important dimension to the meal and changes things. And just as important as prayer is keeping a positive energy at the kitchen table or the office cafeteria table or wherever you're eating. Mealtime is not the time to argue or discuss problems or get angry or upset. It's almost like you're ingesting that tension, and that certainly isn't good for you physically, mentally, or spiritually. So try to make mealtime a period free from tension and distraction. Even if it can't be silent or a meditative meal, it can still be peaceful and prayerful and pleasant, and that impacts how the food you're eating satisfies you. And the other piece of, I think, this awareness and mindfulness is to start a food journal. And that's not to count calories or fat grams, but to continue to build awareness. You know, jot down what you eat, but also when and if there's anything in particular that's bothering you or upsetting you. Start to notice, you know, if and when you grab food when you're not hungry. Does it have to do with tension at home or boredom? Do you eat when you're sad or worried? If you're making notes, you know, do it without judgment. It's not about making yourself feel bad, but about becoming aware of the deeper hungers that you may have. I often say that I have no time for prayer or meditation or spiritual reading, and yet in the past, when I'd suddenly find myself with nothing to do for a few minutes or a half hour, I'd end up rummaging through the pantry or the refrigerator or looking for snacks or making a pot of coffee. I said I wanted prayer time, but when prayer time fell into my lap, I'd find something else to do instead. Little by little, I started to realize that what I said I wanted and what I actually did were two very different things, probably because sitting down to quiet prayer is hard work. It's much easier to grab some popcorn and read a magazine article or hang out on Facebook. A food journal, even the most basic one, will help you become aware of ways you used food to get through the day. And a bonus is that if you jot down how you're feeling physically, mentally, and spiritually as you go, you'll be able to look back when you hit rough patches along the way and see how you've worked yourself out of a bad place in the past. So it can be a really great tool. And when I'm doing my food journal, which I still try to do a lot, I will even write down, you know, if I did yoga, if I did any exercise, if I meditated, because those things too affect us. They affect how we're relating to all the other things in our life. And so it can give you some insights into, did you have more cravings or more food issues when you weren't taking that time for prayer? So the journal can be really helpful. The third step in this, the third overall step, would be to develop some new food rituals. Just as I started my mindful oatmeal ritual, you can create rituals that change your relationship with food. The idea is to not always feel like you're sacrificing, but to come up with new and different ways to enjoy food while giving it its rightful and healthy place in your life. So you can do this by, you know, creating sacred moments. When I make coffee, for instance, I tend to load up the coffee maker and then mindlessly pour cup after cup as I make lunches or read the paper or work at my desk. When I make tea, however, it's an entirely different experience. I am boiling the water and I'm waiting for the kettle to whistle while I get out my mug and I choose a tea and I get out everything I need. Then I pour the water and wait again as the tea steeps. And eventually I make my way down to my desk with this steaming cup of tea, but I realize then that the process of making the tea was almost as satisfying as the tea itself. So we have differences in the way we experience food. So look for those moments. For Christmas, for example, I asked for this Japanese cast iron teapot so I can sort of take my tea experience to a new level. I don't use it all the time, but when I do, it turns it into something more, something sacred. And part of this is caught up in sort of giving yourselves daily doses of joy. Is there a particular food that you love but always avoid because it's on your forbidden list? Can you create a ritual around that food and infusing it with the sacred? Maybe it's chocolate. Rather than depriving yourself over and over and then when you can't stand it anymore, scarfing down an entire bar of chocolate, develop a nightly ritual. Perhaps one square of dark chocolate eaten slowly off a nice dish in front of the fire or shared with a family member on the living room couch and savored slowly. Start to see that learning to get beyond your cravings doesn't mean denying yourself, but filling yourself up with more than just food. The best of both worlds, chocolate and spiritual graces. The fourth step in this process is to bring balance to your life, in basically to all areas of your life, but here we'll focus mainly on food. We can look at our faith to see that balance is key when it comes to celebrations and even everyday food. Throughout the church year, we feast and we fast. We can't feast all the time, and so it is in daily life. I'll often tell my teenage son, whose first question whenever he comes home from school is, "What's for dinner?" Every meal doesn't have to be an event. There has to be balance, and sometimes food is just energy to keep us going. It doesn't have to be a feast. It can be delicious and healthy and satisfying without suffocating us with calories and guilt and all sorts of other baggage. And I think Lent is this perfect reminder of how the spirituality of food can work. I don't know about you, but I always have more motivation and stick-to-itiveness during Lent. I typically go vegan on Friday since I'm already a vegetarian, so giving up meat isn't a sacrifice for me. And I'll often give up in-between meal snacking every day and sometimes throw in a fast day on Fridays. I did that last year, tying lots of prayer to my fast days. And it proved to be so special and so spiritually powerful, I decided I would keep it up after Lent was over. I did not make it through one single Friday after Lent. Why? Because during Lent I had committed to a specific practice for a set time and I soaked it deeply in prayer. Once Lent was over, I tried to do the same, but without that deeper prayer element. And you know what happens when you remove prayer from fasting. You're on a diet. And as we've been discussing, diet without some sort of deeper self-examination or motivation often doesn't work that well. I know somebody who does fast every Friday all year. He has specific intentions that are the focus of his sacrifice, and he's made it work, but only by combining the spiritual and the physical. It's a reminder of just how powerful prayer can be on this journey. It can transform our practices, our view of ourselves, our relationship with God, and with food. So it's really key. And related to that is trying to find some silence. If you can find even 5 minutes of silence every day. It doesn't sound like much, but if you're not spending any time in silent solitude, you'll be amazed by what 5 minutes a day will do for you. And if you can slowly increase it to 10 or 15 or even 20 minutes, that's great. And use this time to rest in God, just listening for the whisper of the Spirit. If you've never tried silent meditation before, be patient with yourself because your mind will want to jump around. And if silent meditation isn't something for you, then find another prayer practice to include in your daily routine, whether it's the rosary or a novena or a meditative walk, whatever works for you. But just try to make some time every single day for prayer away from all the distractions of daily life, in quiet if possible. And that prayer time will be an important part of keeping the balance that we've been talking about. And you're likely to find, if you're not already doing this, that it not only helps you with your food issues, but with so many other things as well. Work stress, home stress, whatever is making you anxious. So really think about where you can build in at least 5 solid minutes of silent solitude and prayer in your day. Maybe in the morning and before bed to sort of set the tone for your day and then reflect back on your blessings and where you'd like to do better the next day. For me, I know that the prayer element really is just so key for me because I immediately start getting very frazzled if I let that go. And oftentimes, as with exercise, in my life at least, prayer is the first thing to go when I get very busy. I don't have time. And really, as I know from experience, that's when I need it more. So really trying to remind yourself it's not a luxury to give yourself those times of prayer. It's really kind of a necessity. And the fifth piece of this process is to celebrate food. I always tell people that Cravings is not a diet book. It's a celebration, a book about celebrating food. The last step really encompasses all the others and then takes them to the next level. Can you imagine celebrating food? If you're someone who is constantly hoping to lose weight or improve your diet or deal with your food issues, you probably love food and you may eat lots of good food, but you may not always celebrate food because it's tied to guilt and bad feelings and regret. So this last step is a huge one because the end goal is to finally break those food is the enemy feelings and find that place where you and food can happily coexist in a way that brings peace to your life, and eventually the healthy weight and diet you crave, but without all the angst. I think that, we have to look at the big picture. It's not just about eating food. This whole mentality and perspective on diet and self and God is really about taking a healthier approach to all aspects of food and eating, from what you buy to how you prepare it, to how you serve it, to how you eat it, even how you clean up. We can look at the Mass for guidance on this. The Mass seems like an odd thing to help us with our diet, but it's true. The Mass is, after all, a meal, a sacred meal. Think about how that meal is prepared and served and celebrated. We don't drive up to a window, grab the host, and then eat communion in our cars as we drive home and talk on the phone. We go into church and ready our hearts and minds for what we're going to receive. The parts of the meal are brought to the altar with love. The priest prepares the gift with reverence and prayer, and then we approach quietly and take communion and return to our seats to reflect on what we've just received. How can we bring some of those sacred moments into our meals at home? That's what we're really trying to do here. The sacred doesn't exist only within the walls of our churches, as you well know. It exists within our domestic churches. And when we begin to see our meals and our cooking and our serving as related to our larger spiritual meals, we get some pretty concrete ways to adjust what we've been doing. Brother Lawrence said he felt just as close to God when he was cooking for his fellow monks as he did when he was before the Blessed Sacrament in adoration. St. Teresa of Avila said that God moves among the pots and pans. So we have to start to think about where we can focus on the divine amid those everyday moments and sort of bring that sense of the sacred into the things that we often just see as chores. A friend of mine who's an expert in the Eastern tradition of Ayurveda talks about pouring love into the food you make. She even goes so far as to say that you shouldn't cook if you're angry or sad because it's like you're pouring those emotions into the food. It's an interesting way to look at our practices. How do we approach the shopping, the chopping, the stirring, the washing? Do we approach it with a sense of resentment or frustration or exhaustion and then only enjoy the eating? Or can we make all of it part of the experience? When we begin to expand our food experience before, just beyond just the few momentary bites to something bigger, and to see it as an opportunity to bring the sacred into our everyday lives, again, we begin to change our perspective on food. Another really important element of the Mass that I think directly connects to our food life outside church is the focus on community. We share our sacred meal at Mass by joining our brothers and sisters for the feast. Do we experience that at home? So often, our diets are sabotaged by, say, parties or dinners out at restaurants, and we feel cheated if we can't eat till we're stuffed because it feels like that's part of the whole experience. Dieting seems to cheat us of that social element. But the social part is so much more than the food. It's about community, whether we're at a party or at home. Community, conversation, gathering together with people we care about. At Mass, we don't need plates piled to overflowing to be satisfied and fed. We need only one morsel. Can we bring some of that into our everyday life? We don't need a buffet tables piled to overflowing with every kind of fried food or heavy dessert to enjoy a party or to enjoy a family meal. What we need is that community, friends, family, even strangers who we get to talk to for the first time. These are all opportunities to be fed and satisfied without overeating. It's just a matter of taking a new view of what the party or the feast or the meal should be. And that doesn't mean we can't have delicious food and maybe even more food than we might have at home when we're at a party. Just that we don't have to stuff ourselves with food to fill our hearts and soul with joy and love. Food does not equal love. Sometimes a cookie is just a cookie. I think that in all of this, a lot that we can learn about food and its place in our life and its connection to the sacred can be learned from the monastics. I always say that they are the original slow food locavore movement. There are so many food fads in place today in what I believe is an attempt to restore some sanity to the way we eat and what we eat. But those practices, eating in season, eating in moderation, eating locally and organic, eating slowly, have been part of monastic life for centuries. I spoke at length with Brother Victor, the author of the many various monastery cookbooks for Cravings, and with some Benedictine sisters. And those conversations highlighted the importance of adjusting our perspective on food. We can follow their lead and begin to choose more carefully the food we make and serve. Can we eat more according to the seasons of where we live? Can we buy more local food or organic food? Can we turn the preparations into prayer, perhaps allowing the rhythmic chopping of onions or carrots to become an opportunity to say the Jesus prayer or to pray for family members or whatever prayer we would like to focus on. I have one friend who knows exactly how many Hail Marys she says in a minute, so she doesn't set a kitchen timer. When she has to beat the cake batter for 2 minutes, she times it by Hail Marys. Find what works for you. Can you make your meal times more peaceful? Soft music, no TV, no phones, no email. At our family dinner table, we always say traditional grace before meals, and then we add in others' prayers during special seasons, the Advent wreath, the Lenten rice bowl from Catholic Relief Services, and during ordinary time, when we don't have any of those special prayer practices, we'll sometimes use a deck of cards with questions to prompt conversations about everything from a book we'd like to step into to what sound we'd want to hear if we could only hear one sound for the rest of our life. And it seems so simple and unimportant, and yet it really has been effective in shifting the tone of the dinner away from sniping over who needs to empty the cat litter and why someone didn't pass the salt or pour the milk, to something lighter and happier and fun. And that makes a difference in how a meal satisfies us. You know, if we're fighting during dinner time, it's not going to be as satisfying. If we're starting with prayer and we're turning off the TV and making sure nobody's answering texts or phone calls, it really changes the tone of the dinner, especially when it starts with prayer. So there's simple things that, you know, sometimes we might do those for special occasions or only at dinner time. Can we bring them more into the rest of our life? Of course, I have had multiple people remind me that many monks are overweight, and so they can't possibly be a model for us. And to that I say, you're missing the point. The whole focus of Cravings is not about being an ideal weight or size, but on accepting who you are right now, knowing that you are loved by God unconditionally for the person you are, not the person you'd like to be. And I think the monastics, whether thin or overweight, offer us a pathway that's healthy in that it strips food of its power to make us afraid or guilty or unhappy, and reminds us that food is meant to nourish our bodies, but only God can nourish our souls. When we combine the two, we have a powerful way to put food in its rightful place. We can celebrate food without being ruled by food. And when we reach that place, I think we naturally begin to not have those cravings. It's like sort of a natural process. And before you know it, you are losing weight, but it's not because you're focusing and dieting and sacrificing and starving, but because you've now filled yourself up with something else. So what are you craving today? Is it really that leftover piece of chocolate cake sitting in the break room, or the cold pizza hiding in the fridge? Or is it something deeper, something bigger, something that can make you more whole in the end? The next time you're about to reach for something to eat, stop for a moment, think, breathe, become aware. If you're really hungry or if it's mealtime, put everything away and say a blessing. Sit down to eat, slow down to eat, smell your food, look at your food, every bite. Chew your food with attention and intention. Enjoy the people around you if you're not eating alone. Savor not just the taste of what you're eating, but the atmosphere, the beauty of the world, even if it's just your own kitchen. There's beauty there too. After all, God moves among the pots and pans. And I think now we're going to take some questions, right, Jared?
Absolutely. I'll take controls back over so you don't have to worry about the screen. I'll pull this up here. So yeah, now is the time for questions. So if you'd like to ask a question, find the questions section in your GoToWebinar panel and submit your questions to me and by typing them and submitting them, and I will read them to Mary as we go through. I have a couple of questions as I was listening in, and you gave us so many practical suggestions for how to be mindful, to be more present, and to celebrate the food that we eat, and to get over our cravings. So I have a couple of questions about the things you talked about as people ask their own questions. First, you mentioned meditation and mindfulness. I'm just kind of curious what your meditative practice is, and like I think you said something really interesting, and most of us hear that and we think, oh, this is an Eastern thing, but I think you're right. It really is very Catholic. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you do for meditation?
It is, and you're right. So many people hear that word, especially when you say mindfulness, and they immediately think something Eastern, and yet it's very much part of our own tradition. And so I have little things that I try to do. I do actually try to do my mindful oatmeal. I continue to try to do that, although I have to say sometimes I'll tell myself I need to reread my own book because it's very easy to slip back into our old habits. So I always say that this is kind of a lifelong journey. You don't read the book and finish it or achieve that place and then move on. It's sort of something you have to really be living every day. So I have to remind myself and pull myself back to it. So whenever I feel myself getting too far off course, I make sure that I do my mindful oatmeal. And then I do little things, even as I'm working throughout the day. I have my computer set to ring a quiet bell on the hour. And whenever that bell rings, I stop and I say the Jesus prayer. So even though that's only like 30 seconds, it sort of calls me back when I'm in the middle of my craziness. And sometimes I'm up in the kitchen when it rings. And it's funny because my kids will hear it if my speakers are up loud, and my little one who's 7 will yell, "Everybody pray," because she'll hear the bell go off and she knows that's what it's supposed to mean. And then I do try to sit down and meditate, really meditate, quietly for 15 minutes whenever I can, hopefully every day, but I have to admit that I don't always get that every day. Because for me, that really does make a big difference. And I think that even when you can't always keep up this, again, every meal can't be a meditation, but when you start making yourself aware, when you do have those moments where you're just going to grab a bag of chips and start eating, I think that awareness that you've now built in, it kind of stops you. And even if you do have some chips, you don't eat all the chips because somewhere in your head, you've become more aware of what you're doing, and there's that little a voice inside saying, really, do you really need that? So I think the meditation really does make a difference. I think the prayer linked with food is really key to it.
It just fascinates me. It sounds like the sacred is just infused throughout your entire day, or as much as possible, maybe. But
I always say, if people could only see what my life is really
yeah, it sounds great.
Just so you know, like all the children are upstairs. They've all been given marching orders not to make a sound. So I try to do the mindfulness thing, but every once in a while you have to do the real thing. So.
Great. Well, we have a few questions that have come in, and I'll save mine for a little bit later, maybe. Angel asked us if you have any particular suggestions for fast food dining, or when you're kind of out in the run and dining out at restaurants.
Okay, yeah, I have to admit that I'm not much of a fast food person, so I've never been somebody who likes to go through the drive-through and get fast food. And maybe that has partly to do with the fact that I'm a vegetarian, which is hard to do at fast food restaurants. But I think that, again, just trying to look for the healthier things. Again, we often feel like if we're going out, we're supposed to somehow be eating something that's like a feast. That sometimes, we feel like if we're going to a restaurant, it's supposed to be over the top. And just remembering that there are times for that kind of eating, like when we're going to go to a wedding or we're going to go to a Christmas party or something like that, where we might overdo it. But if we're going to go to a restaurant just for a regular lunch or dinner, that we can sort of pull it back in, and it can be delicious and it can be fun because we're sharing it with other people, but it doesn't have to be crazy. So, the fried stuff is always going to be that killer there. So I tend to try to stay away from that and eat, look for healthier options, even if it's, again, a lot of times vegetarian things are going to be a good choice. Even pizza can be a good choice if you're not overloading it with a bunch of crazy stuff and eating too much of it and everything else. So I tend to stay away from the true fast food restaurants, and lean more toward, going to the Thai restaurant in town where I know I can get something fairly quick, but also pretty healthy, rice and tofu and vegetables. So try to find that balance, and remembering that you can get to go out and sort of splurge every once in a while, but it can't always be a splurge.
Good, thank you. We have a participant that asks, anything special for someone who lives and often eats alone?
That as I was talking, I was even thinking there's probably people there that are listening in saying, well, I don't have, family to pray with and community to pray with. And still, I think that, as I said, when I do my oatmeal practice in the morning, which I know it sounds kind of strange to call it that, but it really is. That's like such a powerful thing for me, and I'm by myself at that point. So I really like those moments where I get to just be alone and force myself really to not keep all the busyness. And I'm really, even today, you know, when I went to eat lunch, I immediately was going to grab the New York Times crossword puzzle and kind of just stare at it while I'm eating. But I do know that when I do that, I tend not to focus on the food. I'm done eating and I don't realize I ate. So I think even if you're alone, maybe to put on some nice music or spiritual music, or maybe even a reading of some sort of spiritual reading during special seasons of the year, to sort of give yourself something that's, again, feeding your soul on top of it, not to be eating in front of the television especially, or eating in front of your computer or your iPad, but really to sort of honor yourself, that just because you're alone doesn't mean it's not a sacred moment and not an opportunity to really you know, pray over it and make it a special moment that can be satisfying on all different levels.
Yeah, you know, while you were talking about it in your presentation, I kind of got chills because I realized myself that I have a horrible habit of always doing that, and I'm sure so many of us do, that I have food and I have to be in front of a screen or I have to be doing something else because I don't want to waste that food time.
Right.
So, yeah, that's just, I thank you so much for that. Um, so speaking of that, I have another question about something you mentioned. Maybe you can get a little more tactical. So Amy says that my cravings are mostly at night while I'm watching TV and doing homework. Do you have any suggestions? I'm guessing any suggestions of kind of either replacing or curbing that habit a little bit to make it more sacred?
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, I can see the nighttime thing. I think I get progressively worse as the day goes on. I start out really, you know, like, okay, today's going to be a healthy eating day, and then by the time I'm frazzled at the end of the day, it's like, oh, can I? My mom was a great one for always having ice cream at night, so I always remember that, her habit of that. I think, again, you need to sort of find, if you know that that's the thing that you're always going to go to at night, maybe you can put in a different practice and see what happens if the next time you want to go eat something, you decide that's going to be when you try to do even 5 or 10 minutes of meditation, and maybe go to a different room away from food and everything, and away from the TV and away from whatever you're doing, and just sit in silence. Or if you can't take the silence at first, maybe put on some soft music or chant or something like that, and just be in that silent space with God, and not worrying, you know, you don't have to fight yourself on what you're thinking about. You might still be thinking about, gee, I'd really like to eat some food right now. That's okay. Just let it come and go. But sort of removing yourself from that place where you know you're always going to want to have that snack, and substituting a new habit. Or, as I was saying, can you develop a new habit that isn't too unhealthy, like to have this little square of chocolate if that's your thing, or to have a cup of tea with, you know, 1 cookie or something like that, and turn it into a little ritual that it's partly like you're going to put it on a nice tray and you're going to put a candle on, and you're actually going to make it something more than it usually is. So instead of stuffing in a few cookies, you're going to have this 1 cookie with a cup of tea, and you're going to sort of eat it in a slow and kind of meditative way. And it can kind of change things. And I know that I try to do that in my own life. You know, someone gave me these wonderful chocolates when I had a signing, and I would just like to say, yes, she brought me a box of candy bars for my Craving signing, which just seems wrong. But I think it was a test. But I still am breaking off, like, every day I'll have like 1 little square out of this chocolate, and trying to actually maintain my own practices, because I know that they worked. And so when I was writing Cravings, I could feel the difference, because I was so deeply engrossed in what I was writing about that I was living it, and it really did work. So I have to kind of keep calling myself back to those practices.
I want to dig a little deeper because I think, yeah, that just fascinates me, making kind of a ritual around this. How does that work? Could you go into more detail about, you know, are there like certain prayers you say, or do you say thank you, or what is the kind of process? It may be different for everybody, but what works for you?
Well, you know, for me, I always say I'm rosary challenged, so rosary doesn't always work for me, so I always have to find some different ways to do things, because a lot of people, that's their thing, like my friend who prays the Hail Marys, you know, when she's stirring and things. So for me, say, for example, with my oatmeal practice, you know, part of it's sort of even the making of the food, trying to make that be kind of a slow, not getting frustrated, you know, because I spilled this or spilled that, like really trying to be kind of focused on that, I clear the entire table, so if there's newspapers lying around, I get rid of them, so the table is really neat, and I set a candle, and I put out a placemat. Then I make my oatmeal, and I sit down. When I first started, I was just saying a traditional, thank you for this food, or, the traditional grace before meals. And then it started changing, I noticed, over time to where I knew people who needed prayer. So I started praying for people who were sick. And little by little, it kind of morphed into this thing that it almost got ridiculous. Like the oatmeal was getting cold by the time I ate it. But it was, for me, I really liked focusing on other people's intentions. And I have a friend who, when she says grace before meals, it's never like a traditional grace. It's always like she's praying for the people who stock the shelves at the grocery store. She's praying for the truck drivers. So maybe I learned from her, but it really kind of grew from that, praying for the food and for the people who made the food possible, to then praying for friends and family members who were sick, or praying for people. And little by little, it started to expand. And it really did become like such a powerful time for me that it was I really felt the absence of it when I was not doing it. So finding those ways. Now, you might not be able to do that if you're doing homework at night and you're just trying to do something quick. So try to make it a little bit different. Again, I think we always have to try and make prayer fit into our lifestyle, because otherwise we won't do it. So what works for me might not work for someone else. And that's why I feel like people should find what the prayer method that works for them, and then try and build a ritual with, incorporating that.
I think that's great. That's great advice. Thank you for sharing what you do. We have one question that we kind of thought might come up. Participant asks, do you have any suggestions for stopping a compulsive overeating moment?
Compulsive overeating moment. I think that, again, I think we have to try and remove ourselves. The one woman that I interviewed, Barbara, who I mentioned, and she actually goes to Overeaters Anonymous. She feels she has a true addiction to food. And she talked about one night how she was like, she felt like she had to go to the grocery store, and she knew that if she went to the grocery store, she was going to buy all sorts of terrible stuff. And she could just feel it. She could feel that like she had no power to fight that. And so she just forced herself to drive home to eat something small and sort of get herself out of that moment and sort of change up the situation she was in, and then go back out grocery shopping later. And she said she knows that changed it, that she would have bought all this other stuff. So I think sometimes it's, again, we have to almost remove ourselves from the situation. So, and it's hard, because I know I work from home, so I often have lots of bad stuff upstairs because I have 3 kids, and so they're forever getting candy and cookies and goldfish crackers, and there's always like a never-ending supply of bad things up there. And so I know myself that sometimes I'll go upstairs and I'll open the pantry and I'll just, okay, I'm going to like whatever, take out the goldfish crackers. They're not even that good, but I'm just going to eat those endlessly while I sit there and read emails. So I kind of have to stop myself and remind myself, like, this doesn't even taste that good, but I'm just going to eat it because it's here and I'm bored and this is what I do. So kind of trying to break yourself out of the habits we do. Mercy, the other woman I mentioned, she talks about how we have these like habits that are almost like a worn path in the carpet of our brains, where it's hard for us to get off that path. We want to walk the same little worn treads over and over again, rather than sort of go out into new territory. So I think we constantly have to be, again, mindful, and I think that's where prayer and really bringing that mindfulness and stopping the multitasking can make a difference, because when you start doing that, you're much less likely to do that compulsive overeating, because that tends to happen when we're caught up in other things, when we're not really focused on what is it I'm doing, and do I really want to eat this entire bag of chips and then feel bad about it later? Why am I doing this? So again, I think the mindfulness and the prayer actually help with that compulsive eating once we get ourselves into the practice of it.
Good, thanks. Thank you very much. I want to go back to the one little practice you talked about at dinner time. For those of us who have families, you said you have a deck of cards that you use to spark conversation. Do you make those cards yourselves, or did you find like buy a set of cards someplace?
I actually found them. It's called the Meal Box, and it's from a different publisher, Loyola Press.
Okay.
So it's called the Meal Box, and it's a deck of cards. Great. And when I first got it as a review copy, I write columns and about family life, so someone had sent it to me. to review it, and so I tested it out on my family. And my husband was, yeah, I don't want to do the meal box. But my kids, who range are 7, 12, and 16, long after that review was done, they will still, to this day, and that was a couple years ago, ask me to take out the meal box and to pull a card from it. So it's clear that they enjoy that break from, what did you do at school? What do you have coming up? We've got a meeting. We have this. Did you clean your room? Did you do this? We tend to get caught up because that's our only time. When we do eat family meals together, I would say 90% of the time. So we're lucky in that sense. But it's easy to get caught up in the stuff that we're maybe annoyed with them about, or they didn't do this, or they got a bad grade at school. The meal box or other practices like that really kind of pull us out of that and make us focus on something else. And it can be kind of fun. And some people can make up their own, own questions, but they're simple things too. If you had a bridge going anywhere in the world, where would your bridge go to? But it really kind of gives you insights into your kids and your spouse, and it starts an interesting conversation. But it's just, to me, a reminder that if we can kind of break out of the habits we have, especially if you're with family and you have little kids and dinner can get a little crazy. Similarly, when we do the rice bowl during Lent, we'll try to look at the CRS calendar, do the Catholic Relief Services prayers. We have attempted to make the meals at times, although those don't always go over super well with all the kids. They give it a shot. But trying to weave in some of those different things to sort of break us out of the let's just eat and shovel in food and kind of talk about stuff like the business of our family.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's a great idea. I mean, you think meal time can just get very, like you said, habits, ordinary, and that's a really creative way to spark things.
And we do have to, because I have a almost 13-year-old and a 16-year-old, we do have to remind them, especially my middle one, doesn't matter if the phone rings. And we will say that, the phone will ring, and I'll say, my daughter wants to jump up and see if it's a friend. And I will say, no, we don't have to, it doesn't matter. Whatever the phone call is, it's okay. Unless there's an emergency and you're waiting for someone. But we really make a point of making sure there's no TV on, making sure there are no phones or texting or anything else anywhere nearby to try and maintain that. And I think they've, at least this far have gotten the idea. But we'll see as they turn into adults and get their own choices.
Well, we're getting close to the end of the time, and we have one person who came in a little late and wanted to know if you could review the 5 ways real quickly before we finish. Is that okay?
Yes. The first would be to, again, see yourself as beloved by God as you are at this very moment. Again, I think we often think we're beloved if we were thinner, if we were richer, if we were smarter, if we were more successful. So to see yourself right now as you are, as loved by God, and that doesn't mean you don't want to improve yourself, but just that you start from a place of being loved and being acceptable and being good enough, and then everything else is sort of just icing on the cake. And I'm sorry, I'm constantly using the food references.
It's easy and practical. It's great. I love it. Keep going. Good.
Number 2 is trading multitasking for mindfulness. So we focus a lot on when you're eating, just eat, to become aware, to start meals with prayer, and if possible to start a food journal where you're not writing down calories or fat grams, but sort of noticing when you eat, when you're not really hungry, and sort of making notes of that to try and become more aware. So it's a lot of building awareness and not always multitasking and doing a bunch of things at once, especially while you're eating. The third one is to develop some new food rituals. I talked about my mindful oatmeal, that I make a whole meditation out of my oatmeal, or how I make tea. And when I make tea, it's sort of got a meditative aspect. And think about it, the Japanese have a tea ceremony that's really built around that whole mindfulness of that. So again, finding like a food practice that you sort of infuse with the sacred and make something that's a ritual where you get to enjoy food, but it sort of fills you up on other levels as well. Number 4 would be to bring balance into your life, body, mind, and spirit, and to allow the church to sort of be the template, because we feast and we fast. It's not always feasting. There has to be balance. And so it's okay to feast sometimes, just as then sometimes we're going to fast or not eat as much or not eat as rich a food. So really looking to our church even for guidance there, as we can see throughout our liturgical year seasons, seeing in our own life and even in our daily life that there are times for feasting and times for fasting. And letting the Mass really be something that inspires us and sort of directs us in our home meals, seeing the sacred of the Mass and trying to bring that into our home life, preparing our food with reverence, serving it with reverence, even cleaning up with reverence, sort of bringing a whole level to all the different aspects of food preparation and eating. So it's not just about eating the food. And then finally, celebrating food. That we often love food and eat a lot of food, but we don't always celebrate it because we're feeling guilty or we're feeling bad that we ate. And so reaching a place where food is not seen as the enemy, but it's seen as something that can be woven into everyday life and be enjoyed for what it is, but without having that control over us, because prayer is woven into our life, and so we're really being satisfied on a much deeper level. And looking to the monastics in that to sort of influence us, that they sort of have that eat local, eat slowly, eat in season, eat in moderation, eat in a sort of sacred setting or a quiet setting, sort of letting that kind of inspire our own home meals. But to really enjoy food and to come away from this, I always hope people will come away from this knowing that they're loved by God just as they are, and that food is not something to fear, that we can enjoy food and we can make it a good food part of our life without it really controlling us and making us feel bad about ourselves.
Good, thank you. And thank you for presenting today. Thank you for this book and for this gift to us all. And as we all know, Lent is coming up, and for many of us, this could be a nice supplement to our Lenten journeys. For whatever reason, Lent becomes a very, very much time focused on food, so this is a great, I think, supplement to understanding the real meaning of feasting and fasting. So if anyone would like to take advantage of the discount code we're offering today in honor of the webinar, it goes until next Tuesday. Just use the words webinar 205 for today's date, and you'll get 20% off of the book. And there's a lot of very practical application of each of the chapters. There's food for thought with discussion questions, suggestions for practices, and meditations, which I think are very helpful and very useful in doing some of the things that Mary talked about today. So, Mary, thank you again so much for being here with us today.
Oh, thank you again for asking me.
Before we sign off, I just want to say thank you to our partners, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priest Councils, once again for their partnership in this series. If you're not familiar with their organizations, please go check out their websites. If you're not already a friend of Ave Maria Press online, please connect with us at our social networking sites, including Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Vimeo. Mary, but before we go on, can you tell us where we can connect with you, if possible?
Yes, my website is Not Strictly Spiritual, and it's at notstrictlyspiritual.com. So all one word, Not Strictly Spiritual, and it's not only spiritual reflections, but you'll also get recipes. So see, there you go, balance.
Perfect, thank you. This webinar is being recorded. We'll put the recording up at avemariapress.com/webinar-videos. Today's recording will be there as well as every recording of all of our webinars. It's an excellent resource for teachers and parish ministers and all those involved in parish ministry or seeking spiritual nourishment as we did today. Finally, please mark your calendars for the next webinar in our professional development webinar series. On Tuesday, February 13th, author of the Marriage Preparation Program Before I Do, and counselor, Dr. Anthony Garcia, will share some insights into helping couples prepare for marriage. So let your parish marriage preparation coordinator know about the event by sending them to avemariapress.com/webinars. So not next Tuesday, but the week after that, on February 19th, 2013, at 3 p.m. Daylight time. We'll see you there. Thanks so much.